Good afternoon, everyone. How are you all feeling? Feeling great. I see some familiar faces, some new faces, and if I haven't had a chance to do so, I want to welcome you to the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, and I want to thank you for taking the time to join us for our Centennial Festival. It's raining outside, but the sun is shining in here, and so we are excited to celebrate Juneteenth, the Schomburg Centennial, and really the joy of literature and the joy of reading with you. And so my name is Joy Bivins. I'm the director of this here Schomburg Center. And I am joined for our panel called Who We Are, How We Tell It, Stories of Community in Public Spaces. And I have two wonderful authors here. I got a lot of stuff in this chair, but don't worry about that. Two beautiful books, In Open Contempt, Confronting White Supremacy in Art and Public Space, by, my fault, Irvin.
It's okay.
By Irvin Weathersby Jr. You know, I want to talk about that last name because I haven't heard that one.
We can get into that.
Very much. Okay. And then Prose to the People, a celebration of Black bookstores by Katie Miller. So will you join me in welcoming them? Did I call you Miller?
Mitchell.
It's Katie Mitchell. You all, I'm going on a piece of toast and a cup of coffee today. So I'm going to read their bios or short bios and then get into the conversation here. So Katie Mitchell is a storyteller and bookseller. She lives, works, and writes in Atlanta, Georgia. Her online and pop-up Black bookstore, Good Books, has been featured in the New York Times, on NBC, NPR, PBS, and many other outlets. Katie is also a Dorothy Porter Wesley Fellow, and that is a hallowed name in libraries. Irvin is a Brooklyn-based writer and professor from New Orleans, and this is an important point, which we'll get into as we have our conversation. His writing has been featured in Lit Hub, Guernica, Esquire, The Atlantic, Ebony, and other outlets. He earned an MFA from the New School, an MA from Morgan State University, and a BA from Morehouse College. He is the recipient of numerous fellowships and awards from the Voices of Our Nation's Arts Foundation, the Research Foundation of CUNY, the Breadloaf Writers Conference, the American Council of Learned Societies, and the Mellon Foundation. So we have two heavy hitters with us here this afternoon. And I want to, this is to be a conversation between the three of us, of course, but we definitely are going to leave much space at the end to have conversation or questions from the audience. Is there anything that you all wanted to read or that you prepared to read that was on my list? But if it's not, that's okay.
I can read a little bit if you guys will have me. Yeah.
Sure.
I'll read about 4 minutes really quickly. So this is from the prologue, the end of my first chapter, just a few pages. If I can find them. Here we go. I've learned enough to know that I'm called to testify, to elucidate the complexities of space and time through language as a practice of study and expression of art. To this end, I've been a teacher for more than 2 decades, learning as much as I've taught, born of the tribe that is aware of its design and feels compelled to say something when it needs to be said, to do what needs to be done, to face the fear of bearing witness when a soul is trapped in a chokehold or the space beneath a knee. Some call us writers, activists, or preachers, but such titles are short-sighted. Each of us is capable. None of us can do everything, but we can all do something, and sometimes this something means meeting the eye of the devil to tell him that his hatred won't go unnoticed. If called upon, if your goings about life are interrupted by the abuse of your kind, it's your responsibility to make the murderer see you. to hold them accountable for their deeds and take up as much space as possible. It might mean holding up a phone to live stream an arrest, or resisting a protest organized to impeach your rights, or passing out stacks of banned books to children. It might mean something more benign, like walking through a museum as the only Black person in sight. But even this invites danger. Who knows what you may see hanging in the galleries? Who knows how your psyche will respond? To be clear, I'm not saying you should put yourself in harm's way or arm yourself with weapons so you can shoot the antagonists or break any laws that don't deserve to be broken. But I'm also not telling you to shy away from what needs to be done when the stakes are life and death, which is to say, every day. I didn't come to this journey to uncover the disturbing truths concealed in our art and public spaces lightly. My ancestors were the guides. They've taught me to teach what I've learned, to shepherd towards safety when required, and to strike when our foes are vulnerable, when their hatred falters and makes space for correction. This isn't to say I figured anything out, save for the value of opening my eyes to the world and sitting in silence so that it slows down and reveals what I'm seeking. The blessings, which I might call lagniappe, are the unexpected, the invaluable understandings that emerge without warning. I'm here to tell you that the meditations work, that the significance of these silences has been reinforced time and again throughout the course of my life across continents. So when the monuments started to fall after the murder of George Floyd in May 2020, I recognized the opportunity to deepen my understanding of how these streets and statues have shaped our times. I had traveled throughout North America, the Caribbean, and Europe searching, gazing upon statues, staring at frescoes, strolling through parks, listening for voices, on the hunt for validation of theories I had already proven. To reimagine our world, we must recognize how our past lies in the symbols we see every day. But my frame was off. I was looking anywhere and everywhere except the place where I first came to understand the world, the place that just so happens to be the epicenter of American slavery. Understanding that symbols are not static must be our guiding premise. They can't be reduced to mere shapes and signs, colors and shades. They live in our minds as much as they appear on the wall fronting the Cup Food store where Floyd was killed. They occupy a large space in our conscious and subconscious understandings of each other and the world. They remain significant sources of our actions, more so than we realize. How we see and treat each other is the domain of symbols and stereotypes and misconceptions. Only when we engage each other do we see things we can't physically and reinterpret the symbols. The same holds true for monuments. We need to spend time with them and learn their stories to determine their value. But if we overlook the task, if we dismiss it as an insignificant act, racism will continue to infect society, and I'll have to find more space in my head for lawless executions. Thank you.
Thank you for reading from that. I mentioned that New Orleans was an important point, and we will come back to that. But before that, I wanted to ask both of you a question, and it's something that I like to ask authors when I have a chance to talk to them. And it's very simple, and it is, what made you want to write this book? And what were you hoping your book, your title would address, your gaps that your books would address? So I'm going to start with you, Katie.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Katie Mitchell. I'm the author of Prose to the People, a celebration of Black bookstores. Thank you. Which is an exploration and celebration of the Black bookstores here in the United States. I'm from Atlanta, and I had the opportunity to sit in this very room and research for the book, so it's very lovely to be here and see some familiar faces, some bookstore owners from New York, and people from the Schomburg who have helped me. And so when I decided to write Prose to the People, I was just looking for this book. I had seen how transformative Black bookstores had been for me as a customer, as a reader, and as a bookseller. And I see them as transformative as the Black church, as Black colleges. And I saw that they were understudied. And I thought it was very ironic that the story of Black bookstores hadn't been told in book form. And, Black bookstores hold our stories, and no one had told their stories in book form until Prose to the People. And so that's what I was trying to address, and to put all of these beautiful oral histories. The book is filled with pictures and ephemera, put it all in one volume so we can have it. And when I pitched the book, we were in a very different time. We were in a time of celebration. And now when the book's coming out, it's kind of a whiplash. So I think it means a lot more in terms of celebrating what we've done and what we'll continue to do.
Thank you. I'll echo some of that. When I first started this book, the world was different. We're in a different place. I was actually working on a work of fiction about a sculpture that I purchased in Cuba. And I was working on it, I was poring over it, it just was landing flat. It wasn't really working. But in 2017, 4 monuments came down in my hometown of New Orleans, and I had this moment, it was like, wait a minute. Like, I'm in Cuba, I'm all over the world, like, I need to just go home and figure this out. And so I went home, and most of the things that I write really just start with my curiosities. I had this maybe foolish notion at the time that the world was changing. I couldn't believe that New Orleans, the place that, is entrenched in so much racism, the place that I grew up, was changing. And I had this optimistic notion that the world potentially would be changing. It was almost like that moment when Obama was elected. I was like, wait a minute, we're taking these guys down. Obviously we are here in 2025 and things are changing. So that was really the impetus for me. I went home, I wanted to look at all of these monuments that were taken down. And in the process of doing that, I wanted to look at the ones that were still up. And in the process of doing that, I say, let's go around the world. Let's go around the South. Let's go to Europe. Let's go to the Caribbean. And let's look at these spaces. Let's go to some of these museums and see where curators and artists are really taking, racism to task.
I think in many ways, both of your books are about the power of space, about the power of place, and monuments' power to shape or reflect reality, although it feels like they're coming from different vantage points. I'm wondering, Irvin, if you can talk about symbols and signifiers and how they serve us in interpreting power. By the way, I was in New Orleans 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
It's one of my favorite places to go. I learned more in a few pages in your book about the city itself than I learned on any tours I've ever been on in the city of New Orleans. And I saw the Calhoun Monument come down in Charleston, South Carolina. I was there. The day they started taking it down, and remember trying to wrestle with what does that mean?
Yeah.
Because at the time, I thought it meant something too.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if you could talk about what you are wrestling with this kind of power that's in these monuments.
Yeah, I think, most monuments actually do an incredible disservice because they only typically are trying to underscore one event or one person, one moment, when all of those people or places signify so much more. Right? And I think that is what we have to do when we sit with these spaces and we ask ourselves, okay, well, not just who is being honored here, but where is this place? Who used to live here? Not just people, but also animals. What about the flora? What about the natural world? All of these things matter when we're talking about the positioning of monuments. And I think even more importantly, oftentimes we pass these things every day and we don't think about them, right? We think about these names of our cities and our streets, and we don't think about them. But what's happening is they're still working on us, right? They're still working in our subconscious. They are still teaching us white supremacy, right? In ways that we may not necessarily realize. And so that's what I was after. I was really trying to kind of interrogate what each of these spaces was saying, what they were signifying, and really also asking ourselves, well, how could we alter these things? Some of them are pretty obvious, but we still live in New York City where we honor Columbus. Columbus Circle is still, has a white supremacist atop that place. And there's still, we can talk about so many places. Washington Square Park, honors a man who owned slaves. And so, or enslaved Africans, as I would rather say. And so, I think those are what's happening. I think we have to ask ourselves like how we have been taught white supremacy, and give ourselves grace when we recognize that we are also espousing those beliefs. Right? White supremacy is really good at teaching us to hate ourselves, and so we have to take them to task.
And Katie, I'm hoping you can talk about how bookstores also serve to signify presence and maybe intervene or serve as interventions to some of what Irvin is talking about. Because what you're looking at is these spaces that house books and stories, but also they house much more than that. So I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about what you were hoping to bring to bear with that.
Yeah, I mean, I found that Black bookstores, everyone says I'm not just a bookstore when I'm interviewing these people, and I think that's really true. And an example that I found in New York is National Memorial African Bookstore, which was owned by Louis Michel. And for those of you who aren't familiar, that was Malcolm X's home bookstore. So when you see those pictures of Malcolm X on the street doing those rallies, that's in what he deemed Harlem Square, and that's often right in front of Louis Michel's bookstore, also called the House of Common Sense and Proper Propaganda by Michel. And so I think it's spaces like that where you're not just selling books, you're cultivating minds. And he was really close with Malcolm X, and we all know the impact that Malcolm X had on Harlem and on the United States and the world. And so with Black bookstores being these radical incubators oftentimes, I also found that's why they're often targeted so much. The FBI, Louis Michel showed up on the FBI's list in the 1950s, over a decade before COINTELPRO included Black bookstores. And COINTELPRO included Black bookstores in 1968, and that was the same year Drum and Spear, which was the premier Black bookstore in DC, was founded. And so we have these instances throughout the Black bookstore story of the state coming down on these shop owners and coming down on people who would frequent these shops, not because they're making hand over fist money and they didn't want to see Black people doing well, they're afraid of Black excellence, but because they're afraid of Black radicalism. They're afraid of Black people getting together and saying, hey, how are you treating us isn't right, and we're going to do something about it. And those lessons were found in those books.
I think it's fascinating that these bookstores often are situated in places that have stories, kind of the stories that you're discussing, Irvin, as part of their historical narrative, if you will. But you don't just deal with bookstores. You also talk about the Schomburg Center, and you also take us all the way back to a man whose last name was Ruggles to talk about kind of the bibliophiles, the people who were bringing, putting things together, if you will, curating early on in history, and how that continues to impact the ways Black bookstores are made or created.
Yeah, so Joy mentioned David Ruggles. He was also in New York. New York has such an impact on the history of Black bookstores, but he's the first known Black bookstore owner in the United States. And he had a bookstore in the 1830s, which is often surprising for folks because, as we know, slavery was still going on in the 1830s. So here we have an institution that outlaws Black people from reading a single word, and then this Black man in New York City on L'Esplanade Street selling books, often anti-slavery, abolitionist literature that he's penning himself, he's printing himself, and then other publications as well. And the cool thing about David Ruggles is he helped free Frederick Douglass. His store and house was a stop on the Underground Railroad. So he helped free Douglass and other fugitive slaves. And I think he really sets the tone for Black bookstores in the United States of being sites of liberation. And then we see the folks in Harlem like Arturo Schomburg, and the Tree of Life, bringing on those traditions, but also being met with hostility oftentimes because they're bringing in these texts that show that Black people do have history. The Negro does have a strong history, as Arturo penned himself.
It seems like you wanted to jump in.
No,
on that.
I'm just echoing. I'm here and in the choir. I'm just trying to say amen.
Amen. So, Katie, I'm going to go back to you for a little bit because in many ways, I think your book is crafted and curated like an archive, like a curated archive. It has, to me, a lot of exhibit elements as someone who likes to put those together. And why was it important to include more than just the bios of the particular stores, but also images, essays, poetry, and other kinds of, if I will, evidence? Yeah.
The first thing people say to me when they encounter Prose is, "Oh, it's so beautiful." Did you mean for it to be that beautiful? And I did, and I wanted Prose to the People to mimic what it felt like for me to be in a Black bookstore. So when you walk into a Black bookstore, well, number one, you're not just hearing from one person. You're not just hearing from Katie Mitchell. So that's why I invited other community members to be a part of it. So Prose to the People is also an anthology. You'll hear from poets. There's folks who have knowledge about what the FBI was doing. Biographers of certain booksellers are in it. The granddaughters and nieces of booksellers are in it. And then also, when you walk into a Black bookstore, it's very artful. You see the covers of the books, you see artwork that the booksellers really appreciate, and that's why I wanted Prose to be, that's why you see all the pictures and all the ephemera. I wanted you to feel like you were in a Black bookstore when you were reading Prose. And then even in Prose, I'm asking people, what did it smell like? What were y'all talking about? What music were you playing? Really wanting to immerse folks into those spaces, because Prose includes bookstores that are still around today, but it also includes the bookstores from the 1830s and from the 70s and the 60s that aren't around. So I wanted you to be able to visit all the stores that are in Prose.
Yeah, I think multisensory experience is always the way to go, like a really great entry point into telling a story. And to that end, Irvin, I want to talk about some of your experiences visiting plantations.
Yeah.
And looking at the ways interpretation happens. One of the things I thought when reading you, I was like, oh, he still likes museums, which, as a person who works in these spaces, sometimes they are very contested.
Yeah.
And they do important work, but you kind of call out the irony of the museum versus the people who support the museum, and how that could potentially impact what you see in the space.
Yeah. So, it's interesting. I started this book in earnest in 2017, but the first chapter, and this is not a spoiler, but the first chapter takes you back to when I was in elementary school. I was in the 4th grade, and I visited Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's plantation, which is now a museum. And I vividly remember feeling displaced. It's like, wait a minute, I don't understand what is happening here. Like, is this a museum for a president, but these are slave quarters? I don't quite know what I'm supposed to get from this, right? And so I take you back to that experience, and then I take you to other places. I go to the Whitney Plantation, and I go multiple times, which is in Louisiana on the river in the German coast. And I go multiple times, and each time I have a different experience. But the first time I went was right after it opened, and I couldn't see the big house, and the reason I couldn't see it because they were filming a Disney film. I was like, wow, here's the founder donated $8 million of his own money, a white man, to recreate this space and allow it to really reveal what the people who lived there, the enslaved Africans, really allow the story of their lives to come forward through their own voices. And incredibly admirable. Like, I love the space, but then I couldn't really understand and grapple with that disconnect. Like, wow, I can't see this space because Disney wants to shoot a film about witches, on our graves ultimately, and so, and I go to a bunch of other, spaces, other museums, the Venice Biennale, really all over the world, and really just asking myself, okay, I get that, there's some billionaires who are acquiring this wealth, who are supporting these spaces, but how are we to reconcile that? Right, and I think it's up to us. It's up to the patrons, the people who visit these spaces, the guests, to say, look, we would like something else to be seen here, right? Or we don't necessarily value this image, or we need more context. And I think, look, after Floyd, there was an incredible backlash, for curators and museum directors to say, okay, we need to be more inclusive. Obviously, we know things have shifted, but it's still up to us. It's still up to the people who, in many ways, fund these spaces, through our tax dollars, to demand more. And there's incredible spaces like the Studio Museum of Harlem that really help us kind of see ourselves and support Black and brown artists. So it's up to us to kind of to do that. But I'm always going to love museums. I'm always interested in the curiosity of what our creative expressions can offer us.
I am interested because you, Katie, divided your kind of are looking at bookstores from a geographic division or a geographic standpoint. I'm curious to know if you noticed any differences between bookstores or the entrepreneurship that go, because that's what's coming into my mind as we talk about them from region to region.
I was definitely looking for, the West Coast does it this way and the South does it this way. But what I found was more similarities. And I found a lot of connection between bookstores. Like, there's a bookstore in Atlanta called Madu, which is in Greenbrier Mall, for those of you who are familiar with Atlanta. And she was telling me that the Richardsons in San Francisco at the time sent her a box full of books to jumpstart her inventory. Or I'm thinking about Paul Coates, who had the Black Book in Baltimore. He said he would go up to Harlem and visit Louis Michel and get advice from him. And the same with the folks at Drum and Spear. They would also go up there. And so there's a lot of similarities with folks. There's a lot of connections. I think of it as like a big Black family tree of bookstores, and you can kind of see the lineage that people had. And I think it's beyond regions in the United States. And also with the Great Migration, we all, we're all going back and forth between the countries. So there's not that many differences. But one thing that really stood out to me that I think all the regions had was a connection to our incarcerated siblings. And so bookstores that you wouldn't even think of, this is a very political bookstore, had that connection of, we're going to send books to folks who are incarcerated. So the Black Book, Paul Coates, who is a former Black Panther, and also Ta-Nehisi Coates' father, he had the George Jackson prison movement, where the whole thing was sending books to incarcerated Panthers, making sure that they had commissary on the books, and then making sure once they got out, they were being reintegrated into society. Glendolyn Johnson, who is in here today, she had Black Books Plus, and she allowed me to go through her archive before she gave it to the Schomburg. And one of the letters in her archive came from an incarcerated customer. And speaking to the books that she sent, he said, "My body may be in prison, but my mind is free." And so that's what these stores are doing for folks, I think both inside and outside of prison, because your mind can be in prison, whether you're walking down the street, in Harlem, or you're in your cell. But these books having the power to liberate is one theme that I saw throughout the country, and then also throughout the decades. From 1830s on, these Black bookstores have often been at the vanguard of these political movements, and seeing society change their mind in the Black bookstore, and then making those changes to society has been really interesting.
I think this notion of liberatory space is really something that is sticking with me, both with the bookstore as a space, as a place to engage with like-minded individuals or not, a place for debate, a place to have discussions, but a place to be safe, physically safe. And I'm thinking also about art and museums and even place as a moment to engage in liberatory practice. And I'm wondering, Irvin, if you can talk about a bit what possibilities you see given our current reality for these spaces to remain that. Because I will tell you, it keeps me up at night as I think about the Schomburg or our sister brother institutions who do this work, bookstores where, you would think you would be safe and you're still being surveilled. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think, it's easy fall into a spiral of doom and gloom and forget that we have a lot of awesome institutions that are working to really support, our legacies, right? The administration is really trying to roll back a number of different initiatives for public funding, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we can't do these things, right? So we need to kind of recognize what EJI is doing, right? The Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery. Anyone's been? Show of hands. Okay, one person, two people. Okay, it's incredible. I'm sorry? Montgomery. Did I say that? Oh, no, you said, okay, you have your hand up. Okay. I actually, every time I go, I've been, I think, like 4 times now. I actually fly into Atlanta. I think it might be easier. You can just drive over. I also have some ties to Atlanta. I like to touch down in Atlanta. But I say all that to say those spaces are really doing some incredible work to kind of really tell us what we could be doing, right, in terms of honoring the past, but also trying to move forward, right? I don't think that monuments should just be spaces or sites to honor the past. They should also be things that we can kind of look forward and engage and have, be inspired, right? So there's even in Newark currently, there's a really awesome monument to Harriet Tubman, which is really interactive in ways in which you can kind of go and engage with the space and kind of learn things that are not just so static. And so I think those are the possibilities. You think about in DC, the American Museum of History and Culture, or African American Museum of History and Culture, fantastic space. Anyone's been there? Just show of hands. Okay, we all been there. That's good. We should go again. We should keep going. And one thing I love about that space is how 21st century it is, right? How the technology is being used to really teach deeper lessons, right? We all know some Black history. We all, grew up in Black households. We learned some things from our ancestors. But what can we go deeper, right? What can we allow? How can we allow the historians and the curators to really deepen our knowledge? So, look, I'm optimistic. I'm always going to remain optimistic because, that's how we go forward. I'm not going to retreat, as the invisible narrator and invisible man to soar because the world is too much. We got to collectively fight. We have to keep going and pushing and being more creative, right, in terms of the things that are happening. Here in New York City, we have an incredible monument, or he doesn't call it a monument in terms of I'm forgetting the name, the Black woman who was in Times Square. I'm forgetting the name of it. Yes, Grounded in the Stars. Fascinating, right? Where we still have these spaces to think about sculpture and to think about what we can do. And you see the right, and you see people say, hey, look, why do we have to, honor a fat Black woman? And we all know here that that's not what that's signifying. Right, this is, and so we still have to kind of support those type of things, push for those, and really push against those naysayers, right? So I'm optimistic. I think there's so many opportunities to keep writing our futures, to keep writing our past, to keep writing our presence. Like we need to document this moment. We can't just retreat.
And how do you feel that Black bookstores, what role can they play in this narrative at this moment, and making sure that literature still thrives?
I think now when we see this current administration and their book bans, one thing that I'm seeing Black bookstores do and encourage others to do is to simply not comply. Sometimes when you hear a book ban, you're like, oh, am I going to get a fine? Am I going to go to jail if I read this book? But the answer is no. And so just non-compliance. And when we look at the pages of Prose, we see that our ancestors and our elders faced way more than a book ban. The Martin Solstray in Buffalo, he was framed by the local police and sentenced to 31 to 41 years in prison by an all-white jury because he was selling books. Drummond Spear was victim of arson, and one of their managers his car was bombed and he was killed because they were selling books. So a book ban ain't nothing compared to that. And so I think Black bookstores can continue to be these incubators and be defiant and not, capitulate to, the state or to some money because a certain political leaning wants you to, act a certain way or disseminate certain information or not disseminate certain information. So just still be those spaces of, radicalism and have a place for the community to come together and learn and grow.
Irvin, it seemed like you wanted to.
Well, I'm just here to kind of echo, but I think, look, the most radical thing that we can kind of point to in terms of our existence here, in America is to read, right? And to educate ourselves, right? And so I think that's what book bans and bookstores are about. Like, I truly believe, when Thoreau said that he wasn't going to pay his taxes and created this whole notion of, or I hate to say created, or he inspired King and others in terms of civil disobedience. Like, I think we could also do that. We don't have to capitulate. Like, hey, I'm not doing that. Okay, now what? Okay, so, so it's like, what are we going to do now? I'm not going to pay my taxes. I'm not going to listen to what you're saying. I truly believe Dr. King said this, some laws deserve to be broken. Period.
Unjust laws, no law at all.
Yeah.
So, you guys, we could talk a lot more, and I could ask you a lot more questions, but I do want to allow the audience, or if you all have questions, I knew you would have a question. If you could voice that, and just say it loud, and then I'll repeat it back, just to be accessible.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Well, great question. This was right in Central Park, right off of Fifth Avenue, and I thought that was an incredible occurrence, but we still need to keep going. Like that, the commission in New York City stopped. We still haven't taken down Columbus. We still haven't taken down Washington. We still need to kind of go forward. But yeah, I think especially in New Orleans, it was a movement. It divided the city in real ways, and it like ripped open these wounds that we were still kind of facing. And I think beyond just the political, it goes to a deeper core sense of definition of who we are as a people. And I think that's what monuments in a grand sense can do. I'll give you another example. In the book, I go to South Dakota, and I go, most people go to South Dakota to see Mount Rushmore, right? But what I went to see was Crazy Horse. And the Crazy Horse Memorial is just fascinating in terms of the scale and scope and what it's seeking to do. It's going to be 10 times larger than Mount Rushmore, and it's the posture of Crazy Horse pointing at these white men who stole their land. Now, this is not uncontested. Some natives say, look, we shouldn't deface our sacred lands because they did, right? And some natives are like, well, we can also do that. But I think the power of it to reshape the narrative, right, to really come to some sort of objective truth, to understand. I think that's what monuments are about. But I think monuments are also not just physical structures as well. And I think we need to kind of think about monuments and statuary and sculpture more expansively.
Yes. To that point, as you, I was sitting here contemplating James.
A little bit. You want to go? Well, at least what I'm hearing is this whole notion of, because monuments can be more expansive, I think the land itself is sacred in a way that is worshipped in a way and valued in a way that is beyond us, potentially. Maybe, is that where you were going? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay.
That was,
With the easy questions.
yeah, that's a very easy question.
No, look, one of the reasons I went to South Dakota is I recognize in New Orleans. Just show of hands, how many people have been to New Orleans? Okay, that's good. You should go back.
Love
We
it.
definitely, those people who haven't, we definitely are waiting for you. But can you just another quick question? Like, what is the most iconic image of New Orleans that you if it comes to you? New Orleans, the first image that comes to you. Mardi Gras. What else? The balconies, the bayous, music, Treme, Ghost, French Quarter. Okay, getting close. Well, I will say this: none of those answers are wrong. But what I was looking for, and this is almost like the logo of our city, is Jackson Square. Andrew Jackson on a horse right in front of St. Louis Cathedral. And when I realized that, I mean, I knew that, for many years, like, this is where we would go. This is like the center of the French Quarter. This is like the postcard image, right? But then when you kind of interrogate, well, why him and who is he? And you think about, wait a minute, like, this dude cleared the land of natives. He destroyed all these, their culture. And so I had to take a step back and really and say, look, I know how I got here, but while I was being enslaved, natives were being slaughtered, right? And so, I don't have some sort of deeper possession to this place, and actually I think that is one of my persistent traumas for many of us, where we just feel displaced. It's like, this is really not my home, right? And so thinking about natives, and when I go to reservations and thinking about how they hate the white man actively, like, this is a palpable thing. Like, this is not old, this is a part of their current space. I was like, oh, okay, I need to take a step back and think about my largest sense in the world, and thinking about, well, how can I be more connected to the diaspora versus just relegating myself to an American identity. And so, look, I grapple with that often. Like, what does it mean to claim space here when it is so sullied with blood?
I'll give my answer real quick because I know we have more questions. In Prose to the People, I write the profiles of different bookstores, and your question reminds me of the Marcus Books profile, which is located in Oakland, the oldest Black bookstore currently in the United States. But that essay really focuses on gentrification, urban renewal, Negro removal, and what it means for us to be such a migratory people and being pushed out and sometimes fleeing from places. And the conclusion that I come to in that essay is that, the beauty goes wherever we go. So it doesn't matter if we're in the cities, it doesn't matter if we're in the South, it doesn't matter that if we go to the West or the North, the beauty goes wherever we go. And so, now people are getting further gentrified, bookstores are closing down, people are getting pushed out to the suburbs, but the beauty will go there. It'll be cool to be in the suburbs because Black people are there. And so that's one thing that your question made me think of.
So we are at the end of our time. Yes.
Certainly.
And
Thank you.
I am going to bring this to a close, but I think that something you said really is staying with me, and it's a good note to end this conversation with, is the monument is here, right? We are the monument.
Absolutely.
And we take the beauty with us where we go. So it's within us, and wherever it places we end up. And so I think that's a really powerful way to think about it. And thank you for that. And thank you both for this
Thank you.
lovely conversation. And thank you all for
you
being
all.
here. Going to say to you, buy books, support these authors, support the Schomburg shop, support Black authors, support your library. We are in a very historic space here, where the heart of our collections is. And so just make sure you support this space, okay? Thank you for being here.
Thank you, guys.